Hello, and it's time for my first reading wrap up on here on what a month to start with, because in September I actually managed to read 9 books, which is completely unheard of for me. Like, I'm normally quite a slow reader, but I was like totally into my autumn reading list this month and managed to work my way through 9 books. Now, I would say it was because I went on holiday and got a lot of reading done on holiday, but I actually ended up reading loads when we were back too, so hopefully I can blast through lots more books in October. I've had to write them all down because I just can't remember all the ratings and stuff that I gave them. So book 1 was Boys in the Valley, and this had been on my TBR for quite a long time, but it wasn't ever one that I sort of went to, so I thought, right, it's been on there a long time, we might as well start with it. For the most part, it was a really good book. I would say like the first 60% of it was absolutely brilliant, but then there was like a bit after that, like the next 30% was a real letdown for me until it got to the ending. It just went really crazy and chaotic and sort of deviated from how the book had been all throughout. Like, it was quite a good dark horror paranormal sort of book until it just went really like off the rails, and it put me off a little bit until it got to the ending. And now the ending was really good. It wasn't a happy ending at all, and I was kind of glad that it did end that way rather than like trying to smooth everything over. But I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 just because that 30% like towards the end was a massive letdown for me, and I just didn't like the strange direction that it had gone in. All in all, it was quite a good book. I'm like not mad that I read it. It was still a decent book, but that 30% was a real big kicker for me. Next one was The Watchers. I've read another book by this author before, and I have to say the other book for me probably was better than this one. Really liked the concept of this. It was a really like unique, interesting idea. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5, purely because it seemed to drag a little bit in places, and then I got to the end and it became very clear that the story would continue on into another book, and then when I looked it up, there is another book coming out, and I'm not sure I'm all that interested in reading the second book of it, because I feel like it's just going to be a big repetition of the first story. Like, I don't really know where else it can go without it just repeating itself over and over again. Like I say, it was a really good, unique idea. It did just drag in places and could have been cut down a little bit. The next one I read was We Used to Live Here, which has been getting a lot of hype recently, and personally I do think that it is worth all the hype that it's getting. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 because it was just absolutely wild and I loved it. I actually read this in one day, and that never ever happens. Like, I never complete a book in a day, certainly not one like of that length. But I just could not put it down. It was absolutely fantastic. It was bonkers. I was highly confused for most of the book, but it just worked. It was so well done. Like, some books that are a bit confusing like that can leave you feeling really frustrated, but this just really worked and I could not get enough of it. So for me, 100% worth all the hype that it's getting. The next one was Middle of the Night, and this was very middle of the road for me. This is not my first book by this author, and I do think there are better books. It wasn't a bad story. I did end up giving it a 4 out of 5. It wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it was very repetitive to start with. Like, the same points were hammered home over and over again in the first few pages, like, well, first few chapters really, to the point where I was sort of debating whether to continue with it for a little while, because I just couldn't get over the fact that we were just repeating the same points over and over again. But it did pick up, and it picked up really well. I feel like some people might be disappointed with the direction that the book went in, because it had quite a paranormal feel to it for most of the book, but that's not really how it ended. But I enjoyed it. I just don't think it's the best book out there by this author. There are better ones, especially if you've never read any of his books before. The next one was You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight, and again this was another one that had been on my TBR for quite some time, and it was a relatively short novel. So after reading quite a few longer books, I thought, right, I'll just go in there with this one and get it out of the way because it's been on my TBR for quite some time. I loved this to start with. Like, right from the cover to the first few chapters, you get a proper like 80s slasher movie vibe from it, and I really enjoyed that until it took a very strange turn with owls and a cult. And then it sort of went downhill a little bit for me after that, which is why I gave it a 3 out of 5. I really wish it had carried on with the like 80s horror vibes to it, rather than just going really strange like it did. It was a bit of a disappointment, but it was an okay book and it was very short, so no big loss really. The next one is my only 5-star read of the month, and it is a book that I'm going to be doing a full review of because it was just perfect, and that was Brother. I'll not say too much about it because, like I say, I have got a full review of that coming, but it was just one of the best psychological thrillers that I have ever read. This was quite a few weeks ago that I read this now, like 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, and I still can't stop thinking about it. It was such a good book. Like, it's going to take some living up to for anything else that I read on my autumn reading list. It was just so good. So yeah, keep a lookout for my full review of that coming. Next one, I needed a bit of a palate cleanser after Brother. It is a very heavy going book, and I just needed something light. So I went in with a Goosebumps book. Now, I really like to read Goosebumps books on my autumn reading list for when you have read like some heavy going thrillers and horror novels. They are just really great to throw in there when you want to carry on reading and not get into a slump. So I read the scariest book ever, which is part of the new Goosebumps series, House of Shivers. It was okay. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I mean, like, Goosebumps books aren't great works of literature anyway, but I feel like this House of Shivers series wasn't quite as good as the original Goosebumps series. It was fine. It did its job. It was a okay little book to read in between the heavier stuff. So yeah, no complaints really. The next one, however, was another really hyped book, and this time this one did not live up to the hype for me. So it was Incidents Around the House, and I ended up giving this a 2 out of 5 because I really didn't enjoy it. I am really big on DNFing books. Like, if I'm just not into them, they're gone. I don't have time to read books that I'm not enjoying. There's far too many books out there that I want to read that I will enjoy without wasting my time on ones that aren't so good. And I really wish I had DNF'd this one now, and I only carried on with it because of all the hype that it's getting. But for me, it just didn't tick any of the boxes that horror novels should. Like, I didn't find it scary. I didn't even find it particularly like atmospheric or creepy. I didn't like any of the characters. So yeah, it was a bit of a fail for me. It had some okay moments, which is what dragged it up to a 2 out of 5 rather than a 1, but nothing that could really like redeem the story or make it the horror novel that I wanted it to be. So yeah, for me, not worth the hype at all. But I do know there are lots of people that find it really scary and really like it. So, and then my last book for September was Stephen, and this was the newest book on my TBR, but after the things that I saw about it, I just had to go in and read it, and this ended up being a 4 out of 5 for me. It's an absolutely wild book, and it definitely won't be everyone's cup of tea. I don't think it's as extreme as what some of the reviews make it out to be. Like, there wasn't all that much in there that shocked me in the chapters that are supposed to shock people, but there were some really good twists, and it's absolutely bonkers. It really is. It's a gothic horror for the most part, but with quite a lot of other things thrown in there that keep it really interesting. And the big twist in it, I just did not see coming at all, and I really, really loved it for that. The main character is not all that likeable, but I don't think you meant to really like her either. You meant to see that she's a bit stupid and naive and not really be on board with that. So that was totally fine. The really shocking chapter that a lot of people talk about, I didn't find all that bad, but I would suggest reading the trigger warnings for it to see if it's something that you want to read first. But yeah, I loved it. It was nuts, it was great, and it was a fantastic gothic horror. So they were all my books for September. Like, I still can't believe that I managed to get through 9 books. We'll see if I can do the same next month, but who knows. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, and I will see you guys next time.